Hello, welcome. My name is Jason Protas. I'm a professor of religious studies here at Brown. I teach a course called Buddhist Poetry, and I am delighted to welcome you to an evening of contemplation and poetry. This event is hosted by Contemplative Studies, who is interested in the intersections of contemplation of all kinds with other disciplines. We host other events, and I encourage you to check out the Contemplative Studies websites to see upcoming events. So before I introduce our guests, I just wanted to thank Professor Hal Roth, who's not with us this evening. He's at a retreat. He'll be back next week. I want to thank Anne, who's outside, making sure that everything is where it needs to be. And without her, this wouldn't be happening. I also want to thank, there was a special donation in honor of Tonya Healy, who's here. And without that, this wouldn't have been possible this evening. So we're very grateful for that as well. So the three guests we have are also leading a meditation and writing workshop tomorrow from 10 to 1. It'll be followed by lunch from 1 to 2. If you're interested in that, please come find either me afterwards or Anne, who's outside. We also will have the books from each of the poets available for sale afterwards, and so they'll be here for a little bit. So please stick around if you can. So the three poets include Gabrielle Calvocoressi, who teaches at UNC Chapel Hill. Who'll be reading from her book. Are you reading from Rocket Fantastic? I'm so excited. This is wonderful. Sensei Koushin Ellison, who founded the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care and does a lot of work with hospice and dying, and had, among his many degrees, an MFA. Are you reading from your book as well? It's a wonderful book, Awake by the Bedside. I'm looking forward to that. And our first reader will be Jeannine Lentine, who's visiting us from San Francisco Art Institute. Why don't I just turn it over to you and we can all see what you've prepared. So if we could just welcome everybody, please.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's really wonderful to be here, and very grateful to Tonya and to Hal, and it's such a pleasure to be reading with Gabrielle and with Koshin. It's just a huge privilege. So I wanted to start, by the way, we'll each be reading and then talking, and then we'll talk together, and we'll take questions and answers. I recently have been bringing this image with me to readings or to other, in teaching. It was an instrument, it was one of my father's flight instruments. And I just really love its combination of precision and a kind of makeshift genius. And he actually was using that to fly a plane. and I feel like that just really, its combination of the confidence in this kind of the materiality of it, and also the, there are clearly these patterns in it. There are these numbers that are circled. There are certain parts of it that are more worn off. And there's a way that it just really speaks to me of both poetry and meditation practice and just relating to people, and just, it's a kind of it speaks of a kind of flexibility and responsiveness that feels to me like one of my most useful survival strategies. So I love to kind of have that with me. And I just wanted to open with a couple images that are kind of like a catalog of gratitude. And I actually say those words having just constructed that phrase, but then also really thinking about Gabrielle's beautiful poem that maybe I hope she'll read tonight that does just that. So I wanted to show you these images. This is a couple of photographs of a plant that is from my dear friend Koshin. When I was visiting Koshin in New York last year, I took a cutting of this one leaf and rooted it in this glass. You can see the beginnings of the root. This is a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. It was like the first week of November. It was like this for a long time. And meanwhile, after it rooted in the glass, and then it's like putting some roots out under in the soil. It's like that, maybe for a couple months. And then the first new piece emerged. So that's April. So it took from November to April. But once that happened, it was just like, all right, today I'm putting out another new leaf, and now there's another one. This is it now. And it's like crazy. It's just like somehow, like, it is huge. And like, it just keeps growing. And I keep repotting it and putting it in a new ample space. And again, it's also a teacher in the sense of like the patience of not seeing anything coming up yet, but kind of but the other thing that's amazing about this is that the original leaf is still there, like a year later. I've rooted and started many things. They're usually kind of like, maybe this is just how begonias behave. Like, they just stick around. But like, I would have expected it to have processed out that original leaf. This is also kind of tribute both to my student, Julia Guzman, and to Gabby. This was already in my collection of slides to show tonight, but in reading Gabby's book, there are several wonderful poems that contain this gesture. And this was a sculpture. Julia was making a sculpture that was a structure that just held this one piece of wood that you could release your weight into it, and it would hold you like this. And she was my independent studies student. We had a lot of conversations about the comfort of this gesture and like the connection and the kind of like relatedness of that gesture. And like, actually, could everyone do that right now? Just kind of like feel what that feels like. Something really amazing about it, and thank you. And that too, I think that one of the things we've been thinking about for our workshop is the sense of intimacy and connection and relatedness that poetry embodies and performs and enacts. And I think that these kinds of things are really important, like the person-to-person connection. And we've been talking about that a lot in relation to technology also, like eye contact and like human contact. And this is another person who's in the room, but he's in the room in so many ways because, again, he's a person who connects us, both Gabby and Koshin and I, Stanley Kunitz. And this was, I worked for him for 6 years, worked with him. And I say that because of his posture, not because of, like he didn't relate to me as if I was working for him. He was very much, when I first started working for him, he was like, when are you going to bring some poems? And I was like, oh, I don't want to like take your time with that. And he's like, no, it's very much what we're doing. And like nothing would make him happier than if we would just be like reading poems together, both my own or like anyone who visited. Like, it was just the most kind of alive moments. And we spent 6 summers in the garden in Provincetown, and a lot of our time was spent kind of looking closely at things. And again, this is something that we very much want to do in our workshop tomorrow, just kind of think about the role of contemplation and of attention, close attention, what we can learn through being present with something. And this just kind of naturally was arising nonstop in working with Stanley. He'd always be like, what do you have there?
Is that wonderful garden on the hill in front of the house?
In Provincetown?
Yeah.
It's not on a hill. It's in the West End. I can give you the exact, you can see it from the street. It's almost at the end of Commercial Street toward the West End.
Yeah.
What is this? Is it like 42 Commercial? I can definitely, if you want to talk after. Moving on. This is another necessity of poetry. And we're all laughing because it's so uncomfortable, It's like, this is a painting of a friend of mine by a friend of mine. Anyway, just the ability to kind of like, it's amazing. It's like to sit with what's difficult, like to just be there with it. I'm going to move along from that. So that's because, again, that's something we've been talking about. Like, how do you kind of witness, countenance, be with what is almost unbearable? And I wanted to start with this poem because I wasn't actually going to read it, but we've been talking a lot about like what we're doing in the workshop, and I was realizing that this poem kind of does something that we're thinking of doing, which is that I wrote this in this period right after 9/11. This is when I was working with Stanley Kunitz, and he every year would receive this gift from the people who lived in his childhood home, and it would be 18 pears from the tree that he planted when he was 9. And he would just receive, and they were so thoughtful. They sent them in varying gradations of ripeness so that they would just sort of unfold. And this is like, we got those September 10th or something, or like September 8th, and I was like, I'm gonna do some watercolor paintings of those pears. And then like, when 9/11 happened, I just felt like none of that's possible anymore. Like, you can't just sit around painting pears, you know? Like, how can you do that at this time? And then after a few days passed, it felt like all I could do. Because we were in Provincetown, and there was this feeling I needed to be like down in New York and like doing something that felt useful. And so this poem kind of addresses that feeling. And I just, one afternoon, was just wanting, again, just sort of like that's what felt possible, was to just sit there in the afternoon light. And after several days of a lot of talking and kind of like wondering what was going on, I came over around 4 to Stanley's house, and I was just sitting on the floor in their bay window, and Stanley was sitting there reading, and his wife Elise was sitting there, and it just got quiet, and it kind of got dark. And it was one of the first moments where it just felt kind of like just some relief for a moment. And as I was painting, I felt myself not wanting to close this space around the stem. And it wasn't anything I did on purpose. It was just sort of like something that I felt I needed to just kind of hold that open, because it was only 2 days had passed, and there was still a sense that like there were potentially people still underground. So this poem addresses that. The chamber. The day after the collapse, there was still a living person who could be drawn from the wreckage, and still the possibility then of more. And we learned of spaces underground, I-beams and concrete still holding. All I could manage that day was to sit cross-legged on the floor and paint a study of a pear toppled on the coffee table, blushed fruit of a tree almost a century old. Only the sound of the brush dipping in water, all my attention held at the tip of the pear, fallen below the horizon. As I painted a wash around the stem, my brush resisted. I could not close it in. I had to leave a small white rectangle, a passage, a bunker, a clear space underground, an opening where someone following a seam of light might pause for breath, a chamber where a voice might register a faint reverberation. An answer to the fireman at dawn on that first morning, alone on a section of twisted, smoldering rubble, heat searing the soles of his feet through heavy boots. Turnout coats, sulfur yellow stripes, bright in the smoke. Searching the void for a sign, asking hello into the burning ground. This is a poem by Galway Kinnell, and when I first read it, it felt like such a tall order. And I really loved the way that it just put these 3 ises together in this way that was just kind of like, is it possible this can work in language? And it kind of enacts that kind of meditative struggle, I think. Or not struggle, but a meditative open space of back and forth that, again, is something that we're thinking about tomorrow. And this idea that, would someone read that poem? Anyone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You want me to read it out loud?
Yes.
I read it silently.
Yeah, could you just read it out loud?
Many more times.
Thank you.
So, prayer. Whatever happens, whatever what is what I want. Only God. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Just thought it'd be nice to bring that into the room. And another quality that we're thinking about in tomorrow's workshop is this idea of being able to be in uncertainties. And again, this is a posture of compassion, to not be nailing down something before you have any idea what's going on. And the sense of the posture of poetry as well, that to be very open to not knowing. This is a drawing by a 5-year-old in a workshop that I taught at Montalvo Art Center, and I thought it was such a beautiful enactment of that. I think the prompt was something like, a problem a solution that you're trying to work out. And I just love how he has all the questions and exclamation points. It's just like, it felt so familiar. I'll just read this. My father's comb. Black plastic raised letters proclaimed it unbreakable, and so I began to bend the unrelenting spine. First, nothing, then a little give, heat at the seam, blanching at the fault line. Half an hour at his mirror, I worked at it. I worked it away from me and back. I worked at the word, until the atom of its lie split, until the word broke in my hands. This is a Picasso painting that is called Boy Leading a Horse. And this poem comes from it. I don't usually put my poems on the screen, but I just decided to do that in this case. It's kind of fun. Go. When I strike the bell, I'm surprised it's there. Always something in me braces for the bell to be gone. Not gone the way the G was gone from one octave on the church piano, mute under my finger, soft, muffled nothing. More gone than that. The striker unmet, the passenger seat empty. But the bell is always there. And the sound the striker makes against the body of the bell is the clear ringing of my flagging faith, again forgetting the generous world. I insert my Metro card in the turnstile, and it always says go. This, too, surprises me. In Picasso's Boy Leading a Horse, the boy leads the horse with no lead line. I know how both of them feel, the horse, the boy, unbridled, empty-handed, pulled by a lead I can't see. I lower my hand behind me, and something follows. Onto my palm, a hot mouth breathing. This photograph I found in a book about twins after my sister had twins, and it, created a kind of ecstasy in me. And I just felt like I had to share it with everyone at the time, and I now just like to include it because it's also a kind of, I'm just thinking about, what generates poems. And often it's something that we just are dying to share with someone, or trying to put language around, or trying to kind of account for, or, kind of deep wonder. And I also loved the language of the caption. 8-year-old identical twins Tony left and Nick Nato display their reversed hair whorls. Tony's is clockwise, Nick's is counterclockwise. Both twins are right-handed. That was just so wonderful to me, and I spent a summer kind of studying snails, being very preoccupied. Actually, that picture with Stanley is I was showing him a snail. So there's a lot of spirals. And here's one. This is from when I lived at Zen Center. Dish crew. It's fun and efficient. This was a naturally occurring moment at SFAI. I'm including these because they're the kind of thing that will set forth a poem, but often doesn't result in a poem because it's kind of what else is needed? There was a window in the supply closet, and I happened to be walking by, and this is happening all the time. And so again, poetry is about one of the things very much that I seek to cultivate is a sense of receptivity and availability to experience. again. This is like, I was sitting on my bed and like noticed that this had happened, and I was just like, wait, how did I get those off my feet? And I often feel, along with wonder, a kind of gratitude for the kind of ongoing intelligence of the physical world. I'm going to close in a few minutes, and I just want to kind of point to, our overarching topic is poetry and contemplation, and I think that contemplation is often understood as a kind of fixed thing or a still thing. And we were talking last night about the difference between something fixed and something still, and that stillness is a kind of like that there's a kind of deep, continuous movement that constitutes stillness. Like, as paradoxical as that might sound, that stillness does not preclude movement of some sort, and that contemplation is also not antithetical to action, and that poetry is not antithetical to being effective in the world, or being of service in the world, or being of use in the world. And I think that's often something I struggle with, and this was something that really struck me, that this statistic that this was after the election. Was it it was the election, right? Yeah. It's hard to remember which disastrous thing, but it was the election. More poems from poets.org have been shared in the past 2 days than in any other 48-hour period in the past 4 years. And so I think that that speaks to that sense of, people reaching out to each other, person to person, and that poetry carries those gestures. And I'm going to move through some of these. A poem is the sum of unpredictable resistances. Just going to let that sit there. This is a quote from Stanley Kunitz that feels helpful right now. In a murderous time, the heart breaks and lives by breaking. It is necessary to go through dark and deeper dark and not to turn. And that's part of our job as poets, is not to turn away. I'm just going to kind of close with this sky. I'm going to close with this guy, Archaeopteryx. Because I think, I actually haven't been tracking it, but I think really recently there's been another development in this situation of the discovery of the reptile, the feathered dinosaur, this kind of bridge between lizard and bird, and between flying and running. And so that really captured my imagination. And so I have been working on some poems that are kind of in that sort of awkward gait between running and flying. And it also feels very much kindred to Gabby's wonderful poems that we'll be hearing. I mean, the sense of the space that is not A or B, the sense of, it's not a bird, it's not a reptile, it's not a lizard, It's like, it's this incredible space between those poles. So I'm just going to read 2 poems from that to close. And so, Archaeopteryx. Above the lawn, from a high garden wall, they dive in staggered major-scale succession. The row so long I cannot see to the last of them. A ceremony? A rehearsal for a ceremony? Maybe someone directs them. Even from that height, their coats flare open with the fall. The updraft along their cheeks catches the inside of their hoods, letting them feel the first hint of loft as they dive, or not dive, but fall with purpose. Or not purpose, or if not purpose, intent. Or if not intent, release. Or if not release, then surrender. What did I ever have to surrender to, surrender from? They fall so fully, I can only guess there must be at the end of the fall a pool, and not this stone arcade where I stand between these walls. Nothing in their fall impedes them. not regret or expectation, not even curiosity. They fall the way I've seen you walk, impossible in your gait to distinguish sorrow from joy. Going to just move through some of these. Just some images of people listening. Listening. Listening is at the center of my poems and just kind of like paying attention. Someone sent me a note about this, a poem of mine that had the name Ricky in it. You just never know like what your poems are going to do for someone. You just say their name. I'm just going to close with this poem that comes from this book, Found Dharma Talks. And it's just little pieces of language that I would find around. My grandfather wrote a lot of letters to my dad when my dad was in Vietnam. And this is taken from one of his letters. I do the driving, Joe. I like the freeways, and I like my car. Just feels like a sort of ultimate statement of well-being. So just want to end with that. And thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to hearing you too. I think that's it.
So good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Let's try that again. Good evening, everybody. It's amazing how we hesitate. I was very moved by that last poem. And to me, the life of poetry is just the life. But being willing just to participate in what's happening, which, as we know, is becoming more and more rare. Just like, for example, when someone says good evening, and we just look at them. It's so ordinary. Or thinking about my dad in the grocery store, and he said, "Oh, hey, Bob, how are you?" And Bob says, "Do you want to know?" And how rarely we actually stop to really receive. To me, the beauty of poetry is the beauty of living, of really taking the time, because actually that's all we have. And one of the things that I've learned from working with dying people is that they're living people. And many people ask me, like, "Oh, you work with dying people? That's so depressing. How much time do you spend working with dying people?" I said, "Well, actually, just a couple of days a week I spend with dying people who know that they're dying." But the more depressing is the people who are dying but don't know that they're dying and are wasting their time with distraction. Like all of us. So I put this book together to, because I'm asked very often, well, what should I read? What should I read? And I'm asked that by doctors and nurses that I teach, and social workers and chaplains, and folks, friends, family members, brothers and sisters who are taking care of their loved ones at the end of their lives. And there are many wonderful books and many wonderful people doing this work. And so I thought, well, why have singular books? Why don't we create a book that is more personal, that actually brings together community? Because often what happens around end of life is that people's circles shrink. Because people are afraid, because they think that they have to say something, so they don't visit. So when people are ill, people won't go and just sit down, because they feel like, well, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to say. There's actually, the best thing is to not know what to say, in my experience. So I just want to read a little bit from the preface of the book. In 1997, at the King's Highway Diner in Brooklyn, my 83-year-old Grandma Mimi held up her spoon of white bean soup and said, "This is delicious. I never want to leave." Her daughter, my Aunt Carol, wanted her to move to Atlanta into an assisted living home. Her son, my dad, wanted her to move to Syracuse. Mimi was still working full-time at a law office in Manhattan. After lunch, we walked back down Ocean Parkway, stopping every 5 minutes or so to rest on a bench. Back at her apartment, we lay on her couches, eating caramels she adored. Suddenly, she looked at me and asked, "Can I stay here with you?" I squeezed her hand and said, "Yes." So began our journey. At first, there were occasional visits to doctors, then late-night ambulance rides to the hospital. And finally moving in with her into hospice for the last 6 weeks of her life. "Do you know what's strange?" Mimi asked me late one night. "So few people who work here or visit seem to actually reflect on their lives. They're all scurrying about. Why don't they just look at me? Why is there so much fear in just being with another person?" Among the caregivers around my grandma were my fellow Zen practitioners, including my future husband and co-teacher, Chodo Campbell. Once people met her, they fell in love with her. She was one of those. And kept showing up to sit, sing, and give her manicures and pedicures. She loved a good mani-pedi, of which there's a lot to be said for. One evening, 4 weeks into our stay together at hospice, she said, "Call the family and just your friends. I think tonight is the night I'm going to die." After 4 hours of quiet sitting, she peeked at her watch and said, "It's not going to happen. Let's order out for pizza. You must be starving." I stayed with her for the entire 6 weeks that she was there in the hospice, sleeping in a chair for a while at the side of her bed and sometimes climbing in next to her when she seemed particularly frightened or confused. One night, she woke me and said, "I'm so sorry." I spent so many years thinking I knew what love was. But I didn't know anything. I was afraid of what I didn't understand about you. To love someone is to love everything about them, even the parts I don't understand or am comfortable with. Part of me contracted from fully loving you because of that Zen thing.
Because of what?
That Zen thing.
The Zen thing.
I felt that it betrayed our Jewish heritage. Please forgive me. For what? I asked her. For not loving you completely. She said, the way I do now. I now see that there is something so direct about your Zen practice that allows you to be with me in this way. To me, what she's talking about is attention. How to pay attention. You know, I was talking yesterday with some medical students down the hill. And how rare it is that we actually provide the person who's in front of us our full attention. And how simple it is. And also how often it's easy to get caught in our heads and not see how to become free. Helen Keller says, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of overcoming it. So the lineage of where we come from is also the people who inspire us. The three of us were also part of the lineage of Stanley and Marie, wonderful poet Marie Howe, who wrote this amazing book called What the Living Do. And if you don't know it, please do. And much of it is about being with her brother at the end of his life. So this is a poem from Marie. The Gate. I had no idea that the gate that I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. He was a little taller than me, a young man, but grown himself by then. Done at 28. Having folded every sheet, rinsed every glass he would ever rinse under the cold and running water. "This is what you've been waiting for," he used to say to me. And I'd say, "What?" And he'd say, "This," holding up my cheese and mustard sandwich. And I'd say, "What?" And he'd say, "This," sort of looking around. How do we just pay attention? It's amazing to me about how, to me, what poetry brings to us is the capacity just to realize like each thing is what it is. I will speak up. Yeah, sorry about that. Several of us share a friend named Jason Schinder, who was a wonderful poet. And when he was dying, he just kept going on dates and running around, right until the end. He died standing up on his way out. And so he was. Right? And many folks who are friends with him felt that he wasn't really dealing with his illness and were concerned about him not really talking about it. And he left all these poems that were found after. Appointment. When I visited the doctor, I am reminded that I too was sick. And still am. Not because of sadness, or because in 1976 I wasn't kind to my father at his deli on Kings Highway. I swept the floor without talking to him, without knowing what work was and money. When I looked, he was slumped in a chair, pulling the ends of his mustache. I am not sick because of anything. Just because. The doctor digs his fingers into the liquid tumors growing just beneath the skin of my neck and the crossword puzzle of hair under my armpits. I imagine the yellow leaves hanging from the branches of the willow tree that fall in Paris long ago. A young Chinese nurse stands in the doctor's office, alone in her body, as if under a street lamp. The white neon light of her breath going out of her, going out. I slip my pants down to my knees. When I was in love, I could not get used to the hours with someone in them. What have you been feeling? The doctor asks. Nothing. I turn away and cough, and in that moment, when the doctor is feeling my grainy-skinned, quiet pair of balls in the precise and careful way, I'm ashamed. That something in me, some absence of myself, some loneliness I've never understood, which sometimes disappoints, but which sometimes shows me who I am, is made better by his slight touch. One of the things that I learned so much about working with dying people and the importance of poetry is that we have these intimate experiences that we're often ashamed of and don't share. And sometimes the power of a poet is to bring voice to the ordinary humiliations that sometimes people experience as they're sick. And suddenly you're in community. At least I feel that when I read these poems. Oh, me too. I've felt embarrassed too about some of those things. How do we just relax? How do you relax into our own experience? I wonder about that all the time. I remember when my grandma died, I was so sure that I wouldn't forget her face. And now it's been almost 17 years since she died. And I still look at her face every day in a picture because I'm concerned that I will forget exactly what it looks like. So there's a poem called The Embrace by Mark Doty. You weren't well or really ill yet either. Just a little tired, your handsomeness tinged by grief or anticipation, which brought to your face a thoughtful, deepening grace. I didn't for a moment doubt that you were dead. I knew that to be true still, even in the dream. You'd been out at work maybe, having a good day, almost energetic. We seemed to be moving from some old house where we'd lived, boxes everywhere, things in disarray. That was the story of my dream. But even asleep, I was shocked out of the narrative by your face. The physical fact of your face, inches from mine. Smooth shaven, loving, alert. Why so difficult? Remembering the actual look of you. Without a photograph and without strain. So when I saw your unguarded, reliable face, your unmistakable gaze opening all the warmth and clarity of you, warm brown tea. We held each other for the time the dream allowed. Bless you. You came back so that I could see you. Once more, plainly, so that I could rest against you. Without thinking this happiness lessened anything. Without thinking that you were alive again. anecdote has that power. So I'll just close with this poem that for me is always the wonderful instruction by this wonderful Caribbean poet. It suggests to me like all we really have to do is, not just pay attention, that there's this engagement and deep participation that is essential. Yeah. I know. This is the last thing I'm reading.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door. In your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored. For another who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit and feast on your life. Thank you.
I wish we could have the picture of Stanley up again, but there's not. But let's imagine Stanley's beautiful faces and Jeannine's beautiful faces right there. I'm so grateful to be here this evening. I'm so grateful to everyone. It's interesting to think about lineage. And when, Stanley Kunitz was a poet that I never met. I'm going to look for a poem, actually, by him, who I never met, but who had taught all of my teachers and was a huge force in their life and in mine because of that. And there are a lot of things I wasn't, but I was a good student, and I wanted to be a good student. And but before I started studying with people who had been with Stanley, I loved Stanley Kunitz because we were both people who had a parent who killed themselves, and who. And so when my mother killed herself when I was around 13, that was nobody showed me that poem then, but later, his poem, The Portrait, was a poem that people would give to me. And so I'm going to start by reading it. The Portrait. My mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time, and in a public park that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with the pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown level eyes. She ripped it to shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. I grew up in a house where nobody talked about my mother's mental illness. She didn't live with us. She was too sick to live with us. Well, I was told she was too sick to live with us, right? That's a choice. When she killed herself, nobody talked about it. So there was all this silence. And I really started writing poems, I think, to try and find language for something that I found unspeakable, but also like unspeakable, not in terms of the horror of it. I don't know that I felt that way about it yet, but certainly in terms of how do you make language out of something that people won't speak about and that is sort of very difficult to find language for. And Stanley was someone who really helped me do that. And when I think about people like Mark Doty, Mark Doty was my first teacher, and he was my teacher during my year with him in college. That was the year that Wally was, his partner was in his final days. And I think about this because I think of all the things he taught me about poetry and, in terms of like the poem itself, the thing that Mark did that was the most remarkable thing was that he kept teaching us while his partner was dying. And Marie Howe was there, and all of these people were in sort of the guts of the AIDS epidemic. And I realized that so much of how I think about what I hope to be as a teacher and what I hope to be as a poet and as a citizen actually has to do with being in a room with someone who kept talking about poetry and being their open, vulnerable self, and every once in a while in the middle of class, someone would walk in and whisper in his ear, and he would shut the book, and he would say, "I have to go." And it would mean because something had happened in Provincetown, and he had to get back to Wally, and then he would be back with us. That ability to live in multiple worlds and let the borders of those worlds seep into each other, while also having deep privacy, is something, and intimacy in many different kinds of ways is something I think about a lot, and it's something this book thinks about a lot. Rocket Fantastic. I'm going to read a little bit from it, and I may talk in between and I may not, but what I will say is that there are, I don't know what gender I am, and for a long time I tried to figure it out, and then I decided as I got older recently that I just didn't need to know anymore. Like it was okay not to know. And so there are poems in here that have a symbol instead of a gendered pronoun, and I make a sound for that. And who knows what you'll think of that? This could be the great failure in American poetry, one of many. But if you hear that, it's just me trying to figure it out. The sun got all over everything. Over the boys and girls by the pool. Over the bougainvillea, which got so hot, my poems stayed warm for minutes after. It made a mess of a day that was supposed to be the worst and lured me outside, so I forgot her death entirely. And also the polar bears scrambling on the ice chips. And also that there was no water in the Golden State. The pool was full and the sun poured across the women's bodies, so you had to shade your eyes. Or I did. I had to put my hand up to see what they were saying. I know it's no excuse, and I had made a plan to cry all day and into the evening. I marked it in my book, which seems like something I'd make up in a poem, except this time I actually did it. I wrote grieve, because we're all so busy, aren't we? And so broke. I needed to make an appointment with my anguish so I could take my mind off buying groceries that I really couldn't afford. Anyway, I didn't mean to go outside, except there the sky was, just ridiculously blue, taunting me with pigment that I felt the need to name. And from somewhere close by, a voice I couldn't see because the sun was like a yolk cracked over it said, "What are you drinking?" And I said, "I'm grieving. I'm very busy remembering. I made an appointment because last year I forgot and felt awful." The sun opened its mouth and made a gong of the canyons. It poured across the girls and slicked across their Dior lenses. I put my tongue on it exactly when I should have been tearing at my clothes and lighting candles. I got on top and let it find the tightness in my back and open where my wings would be. Somewhere my mother was dying and someone was skinning a giraffe. And I let it go. I just let it go. Achingly beautiful how the sky blooms umber at the end of the day through the canopy. Summers spent practicing in the apartment stairwell, hand on the banister, one foot after another. Did I ever tell you I couldn't walk until I was 3 and then sort of dragged myself up and down stairs until I was 7 or 8? That burgundy carpet. I'd stop to breathe and look out the window over brick tenements toward the Capitol building. Oak leaves so full of late summer sun, even I thought obscene, and stood stunned for a moment. My God, the urge to rest like the birds on the phone wires, chatting like barristers at the end of the day. Myself, the useless ambassador from the 3rd floor. I was the last one up, so the door was left open. I can still see it gaping from 2 stories down. Sometimes music played, sometimes I'd smell supper. Neighbors stopped to say hello. Achingly beautiful how the sky looked as I stood after they left. Nicer somehow in the middle. All the trees tucking blackbirds into their darkness. It really did take this long. I like it when touches me there. Right above the forehead with whose whole palm and moves whose hand along my skull until it rests below my neck and sort of holds me there, and how we stay like that before it even starts, right there in the stillness, like the best part of the movie when the lights go down and everyone sort of shakes together and relaxes. I like to watch who start to want things right before tells me what wants, how wants it before sighs and says my name like a surprise and starts to move whose hips and how asks me how I do it. Oh God, right there like that in the stillness sounds just like a girl, just like I sound when we come together. Then relax. I like it when whose hand tightens on my skull right at the place my neck begins. Says, sorry, I didn't mean to hold that tight. I say, it's all right. I like it when you hold me like that. She ties my bow tie. She couldn't tonight because she's not here, but usually she does. She ties my bow tie. What you thought was the sound of the deer drinking at the base of the ravine was not their soft tongues entering the water, but my love tying my bow tie. We were in our little house just up from the ravine. Forgive yourself. It's easy to mistake her wrists for the necks of deer. Her fingers move so deftly, one could call them skittish, though not really, because they aren't afraid of you. I know. You thought it was the deer, but they're so far down you couldn't possibly hear them. No, this is the breeze my love makes when she ties me up and sends me out into the world, her breath pulled taut and held until she's through. I watch her in the mirror, not even looking at me. She's so focused on the knot and how to loop the silk into a bow. Bow ties. Oh. I mean, I had a mane once, a glorious thicket, a generosity for all the cicadas to visit when the rains descended. I let the hornets make a mockery of me. I didn't sweat it. I let them sting and sting. Because I was enormous and magnanimous, I cut my leg and let the maggots build an empire. What did I care, I'd say to the fox. There's enough meat in me to go around. Then I'd stretch so the grubs could find new avenues, and they'd shiver with gratitude. They'd pass out drunk along the edges of the wound. I was my own economy. You could see me coming for miles around, and yes, I could break your last best thing in half. And yes, I was every inch an animal. But most days I was merciful. I'd pretend I was sleeping. I'd take all my danger and lay it at the river's edge. I like it when touches me there, right above the forehead with whose whole palm and moves whose hand along my skull until it rests below my neck and sort of holds me there. We were out on point and it got so cold that I don't know, but I just sort of broke, just started crying like Dad said I would when I told him I was going. Remember how he told me how I'd break? Well, I broke, but not how I'd thought. We weren't even in much danger, and God knows by that time I'd seen worse. But it was just cold, and before I knew it, I was crying in my stupid hands and could not stop shaking, and T took his hand and held it there, right there above my forehead and said, shh, and moved it over the back, but with this kind of pressure that made me feel like it was getting still. I felt the earth beneath me and heard a train off in the distance and said, I'm sorry, I'm so fucking stupid. And he said, don't worry, Pasadena. And just held my head there in his palm. This poem takes its title from a story by Grace Paley. It's a sentence in Grace Paley's poem, and it's called story, and it's called "I Was Popular in Certain Circles." I was popular in certain circles, among the river rats and the leaves, for example. I was huge among the lichen, and the waterfall couldn't get enough of me. And the gravestones, I was hugely popular with the gravestones, also with the meat liquefying beneath. I'd say to the carrion birds, I'd say, are you an eagle? I can't see so well. That made us laugh until we were screaming, eagle, imagine. The vultures loved me so much, they'd feed me the first morsel from their delicate talons, which is what I called them, such delicate talons. They loved me so deeply they'd visit in pairs, one to feed me, one to cover my eyes with its velvety wings, which were heavy as theater curtains, which I was sure to remark on. Why can't I see what I'm eating, I'd say, and the wings would pull me into the great bird's chest, and I'd feel the nail inside my mouth. What pals I was with the scavengers, and the dead things, too. What pals. As for the living, the fox would not be outdone. We'd sit on the cliff's edge and watch the river like a movie, and I'd say, I think last night, and the fox would put his paw on top of mine and say, forget it, it's done. I mean, we had fun. You haven't lived until a fox has whispered something the ferns told him in your one good ear. I mean, truly, you have not lived. I'll just read one more. Do no harm. I think a lot about that right now. Some thoughts on building the atom bomb. I would not have been great at it. Firstly, I was terrible at science. I got as far as slicing the frog's abdomen open. Then I made an excuse and walked the halls till the bell rang. I know what you're thinking. That's biology. When I looked inside the cavity, I knew I didn't have what it took for a life in science. God, I have intestines like that thing. They pulse and shine like his. Cut me open, you'll see my supper too. No, when I looked inside the cavity, I thought, I can't go on. Volition, that's a thing I don't have. I'd leave the patient on the table rather than get the job done. I'd walk right into the desert and roll around like a chinchilla while everyone else back at the office is considering implosion. I'm dusty as a chinchilla, I'd say, entering the lab. I'm the outside of your mama's fallout shelter. Those poor scientists. Every last one wondering what I'm doing there. I mean, I'd love to see the sky bloom, but I can do that already. Look, the sky is blooming right now, outside the window, and plenty of people are dying in various ways. And won't the infrastructure fail all on its own, without me building a bomb in the desert? These are the kinds of questions that make me know I'm not fit to decimate the planet, which is sort of sad to think about, all that potential I'm just giving up on. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful night.
Oh my gosh, thank you three so much for sharing with us these wonderful presentations. And so we've left some time here at the end, about 10 minutes or so. If anyone would like to initiate a conversation or with questions or comments for the poets, and afterwards we have some snacks outside as well as the books for sale, and these three writers will be outside if you want to talk to them about their work. And I'll just remind you that tomorrow there's a workshop to speak with them, to meditate with us, and to write with us. So if you'd like to come, please come speak to either myself or Anne outside. So just want to open up. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to speak now.
I want to ask a question.
Please.
What did the medical students say in response to all of your comments about being patient, speaking with people, communicating during death? I mean, you had a great opportunity with them. Being a nurse, I need to know.
The question was about Koshin's event last night at the medical school. Do you want to?
So it's a great question. So how did they respond?
Yeah, what did they think?
So they're taught extremely well how to think about procedures and memorizing enormous amounts of data. And many of the people who were there last night also realized that there's something missing. And so there's some efforts at the medical school to change that, but I think what's missing is how do you talk to people? How do you look at people? How do you talk to people that you don't know and being willing to say, I don't know? And so I think that there's a great hunger in the students to learn more about that. absolutely.
So we need that so much.
Indeed, we do. I saw some more hands go up. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. My question is for all three of you. In your poetry, you allow for a lot of the specificities in your emotions and your feelings, and I'm wondering, when you're writing, are you writing for yourself or are you writing for consumers? And in the latter case, how do you allow for entry for readers to indulge in their emotions through your experiences? So that's the first part of my question. And the second part of my question is, in general, through those personal experiences and through the more consumer-oriented experiences, how do you allow yourselves to be that porous to the world? Sorry, that was a very loaded question.
Who wants to take on part of that question first?
I think I'm happy to
Yeah, go ahead, Jeannine.
talk to that. Such a good question. Partly the question about specificity and a place of entry. So I think, and then the other part about kind of the vulnerability of speaking from that place, and you both addressed that as well, like that sense of how do you trust that that gesture maybe will be met with a kind of openness or a kind of like even just a neutrality, and is it necessary? Like that's a question that often kind of stalls me. Is what I'm doing necessary? Like, and so you first were asking, do you write for yourself or for? It's so interesting that using the word consumer. It's really interesting because it sort of like brings up buying, but it's also like eating. You know, kind of like someone. I think of it more not as a relationship of like selling something or like feeding someone, as just relating to someone. Because that's so much how I read. Like I read to find company or to find like a way of speaking or to find a way of living, you know, like a way of moving forward. Literally, like a poem can help you. I think this is a great moment to tell this story. There are many stories of like poetry, like encouraged me to live, or you know, where it's just like poetry in some way nourished me. This is a story of literally a poem keeping someone alive. Like, and this was, and I feel okay telling this story because someone came to me with this story and he told me it and I actually asked him if I could share it. This was someone at Zen Center, San Francisco Zen Center, who had a very deep meditation practice, but he also was very clinically depressed. And after a really difficult period, felt suicidal, and he planned his suicide. He planned to walk up. First of all, this is like an interesting thing because he walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, where many people go to commit suicide. He walked across the Golden Gate Bridge to the woods near Green Gulch Farm, where he knew there was hemlock, and he wanted to take. He had researched it. He researched how much hemlock he needed to take, and I learned later that there is something called the suicide committee. Like when people are suicidal, there are many voices, many kind of like people, like sort of a range of people, or a range of I don't know, like feelings that we have about whether we're going to live or not. And so his suicide committee suggested that he bring Walt Whitman to his suicide. So one person on his suicide committee wasn't really like in favor of going through with it, you know? But you bring Walt Whitman to your suicide, you probably aren't going to actually do it, maybe. But so he actually went into the woods. He sat down and ate hemlock. He started eating the amount that he had researched. He was starting to feel tightness in his chest. He was starting to feel bored. He told me that. He was like, I'm starting to feel bored, so I picked up the book I brought with me, which was Walt Whitman's poems. And he opened the book, and the line he opened to was, despairer, here is my neck. I breathe you with something breath. you will not go down. And, and he said, I threw the book across the path. And he was so stunned by this, like the directness of the exact line that he opened to. And he got up and started walking out of the woods. Actually, one detail I forgot to tell you is that he was right at the front edge of the woods because he took a cab. He took a cab to the bridge. He was going to take it over. The cab driver wanted the $6 for the toll. He's like, I wasn't coming back. I wasn't going to pay his fare back. And again, he had brought like $120 with him. But like because he didn't want to take the cab, he walked all the way across the bridge, which meant he didn't get very far into the woods, which saved his life. Because he walked out very quickly. Someone picked him up, took him to an ambulance, and he lived for 3 years. Wow. But that was like the most literal. I mean, that is a poem speaking to someone so directly. It literally was like, it picked him up and he walked out of the woods. So I don't know if that answers your question, but does it answer your question? About necessity, perhaps?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to say yes if it doesn't. But that's what your question brings up in me, because to me it was like, it addressed my own sense of like, do my poems feel necessary? Because I don't think we could ever know if they are. I think that if we can just respond to our own sense of necessity of like what we need to say, what feels necessary to say, and kind of really just pay attention to what you read, what helps you. Do you want to speak to it? That was a long answer, but
I think what I'd like to know is what do you mean by when you say consumer, what do you mean?
I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is when you're speaking, when you're offering poetry for healing and you're speaking about your own personal experiences, when you're writing about hardships in your life, how do you know that the readers are viewing that poetry in a productive way versus a destructive way? How do you know that your poetry isn't bringing someone into your personal hardships, or that you're offering an escape, or, as you said, a way to relate to people? And is that something you worry about in your writing?
No. I don't worry that if I'm talking about, but it's interesting, right? Because this, I think, consumerism gets into this, right? Like, I think of my poetry as deeply a conversation between myself and the reader. I've never been interested in writing a poem that wasn't available for a person to like or dislike, right? But I write a lot. Like I write about my mother's suicide. There's a lot of violence in my books, right? I experienced a lot of violence growing up, as many of us did. Am I concerned that someone might read those poems and be re-traumatized to some extent? I'm not. And that, I think, is not saying I don't care if they're re-traumatized. Does that make sense? Like, it's me saying that I think that one of the things I've had to do in my life, and my poems, I think, and I've done this in my poems and through poetry, is not try and heal the trauma that I guess I actively don't try and heal the trauma I went through. When I don't try and heal my mother's suicide, I try to be with it. Does that make sense? Like I try and be in the presence of it, and the more I can open to it, and perhaps within my poems, open to possibly like what she was actually going through, an impoverished, mentally ill woman in the Reagan era in Vermont, that perhaps would result in healing in some way more than me writing a poem that attempted to either protect or heal someone, if that makes sense. Like, the ability to, maybe through my poetics, hold space for that, and maybe make a kind of space where the reader can also sit and hold that. That might be the wrong answer, but it's my answer. I spent a long time trying not to think about my mother's suffering, and then I spent a long time in poems trying to romanticize it, and then I spent a long time trying to heal it. And what I realized is all of those things were a way of patronizing her, and also not allowing myself to open myself to, oh my God, this was terrible. Maybe I'm gonna sit with that my whole life. Wow, my life is so great today. Oh God, like, oh, wow, she was suffering. You know, if a reader would sit with me in that and learn to breathe during that, I would feel very happy about my poems. And I think that would be also an anti-capitalist gesture, which would bring me back to readership instead of consumerism. That's not a judgment on your word consumerism, but I think we're in a high capitalist moment everywhere, particularly in American poetry. And I think that I want to confront that.
Are there any more urgent comments? Please, go ahead.
Speaking to that, I just spent 10 days in a critical care unit with my mom, and what kept happening for me was I kept remembering certain poems of Jannine's that I heard her read in the past about her experience of being in hospitals when a family member was in a place. And I remembered Marie Howe's tone. Like, I couldn't remember specific poems, but all of that was with me in a different way in that time than it had been when I had first read those poems or heard those poems read. And I'm so grateful for these expressions that it had been years since I had heard Marie read, and I felt like she was with me as I just stood for hours without moving, holding my mother's hand and hoping she would breathe independently. Like, I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I'd welcome another urgent comment. We have plenty of beverages and time to sit and speak with these wonderful writers. I'm so delighted the three of you who come from the shared genealogy. We heard a lot of people speaking about Stanley Kunitz, Marie Howe, and to have such different voices between the three of you. But I think everyone has the shared poetics of attention, and an important part of your poetics comes out of your contemplative practice. So I'm just delighted the three of you could be here to speak to all of us. I thank all of you for coming, and just one more time we can thank them. We'll close now.